Welcome to another episode of Red and Black, where your conservatism is not just the color that you used to. I'm Lenny McAllister, and I am co-counsel for Donald Trump's recent lawsuit to sue Hillary Clinton. I don't even have a law degree, and I don't think that the former president has a case to sue the former Secretary of State. But Dr. Metzler, you are an attorney. You do have a law degree. And before I get into the serious side of that and all other things serious, really, are we still doing this? Suing over lost elections, won elections, nana boo boo rumors over elections?
Yeah, unfortunately, we are still doing this, and like you're saying, we can't win if we don't let go of the past. Move on. It's time to move on. This is over. That lawsuit's going nowhere, but we're still doing that.
So Jeff Charles, before we get into all things serious, when do we give up the ghost of Christmas past and past elections as a people? Just I'm asking, not as a Republican, not as a conservative, not as a voting American, just as a person.
Well, as a person, if you want to move on from an election, you got to distract yourself. You got to do other things. What the audience can do right now is like, share, and subscribe to our channel.
That's right.
Away from these past elections. But here's the thing. Some of us are still litigating 2000. So, yeah. I mean, it's not surprising that we would be litigating 2016. We already know what happened. We know the Democrats lied about the whole Russia collusion thing. Trump is doing this for show. This is going to go exactly the same way that Stormy Daniels' lawsuit went against Trump. It ain't going to go anywhere. He knows it ain't going to go anywhere. Everybody knows it ain't going to go anywhere, including Trump himself. So maybe he's just doing this for fun. I don't know. I don't get it. I mean, he recently rescinded his endorsement of Mo Brooks because he said we should move on, at August. But still, I mean, I think most people want to move on, but some people just don't. They want to live in the past.
Priscilla, is this your definition of fun?
Absolutely. Being here with you guys and talking about yesterday's news and current news, it's absolutely fun. But I think, like my colleagues here, looking forward is really where it's at. I mean, there's plenty of current events for us to talk about and focus on. And we are in the business of providing solutions. And people want solutions. They're tired of talking about the past. There are a lot of realities right now that are not good with inflation and safety and education. We need to be looking forward.
So it's interesting. I'm going to kind of take what Priscilla said, because she's the lady and it's her prerogative, and blend it into one of the first things I want to bring up, which is looking at the past, but also looking forward, which could pretty much sum up the Brown-Jackson confirmation hearings. Because if you look at what transpired, you had this blend of looking forward to most likely the first African-American Supreme Court justice, while we were looking back on one of the biggest boogeymen of the last several years, which of course is, say it with me, CRT, critical race theory. And how could you ever do something with a very adamantly pissed off Republican without bringing up those three magical letters? And so, Dr. Metzler, I'm going to go to you first, because you've been involved with these things, and this kind of goes back to the time when you served on the Supreme Court. When you go through a situation like this, and you pull in a political boogeyman like this to try to tie it around her like as a millstone, and it's not going to work. Scars are up a little bit, but it's not going to stop the confirmation. But it seems as though this is the well that Republicans are going to keep going to. This well got to be going dry. Now, you could talk about the confirmation hearing first if you want, but I also kind of want to talk about the CRT aspect of this, because it's getting played. It is worn out. It needs to be recycled or tossed aside in something new, it would seem.
Well, yeah, and here's the thing. They never really asked her a question about CRT. It was just always all this rambling back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. And it's like, okay, you know what? Enough with the CRT stuff. Look, the question becomes, as she, and here's the thing that they thought they were going to do with her that they weren't able to get away with. would you recuse yourself from the Harvard affirmative action case? She said, absolutely. Because what they were going to do at that point is then tie Harvard into CRT, and that was not going to work. Now, contrast that with the fact that Justice Thomas and Ginny Thomas, his wife, Ginny has been doing, of course, Justice Thomas ruled on a January 6th case. The problem with that is that Ginny was involved in paying for the buses to get to that case. He should have just simply recused himself. No, instead, he voted it. He was the only dissenter in that particular case. So the CRT stuff, there was a very specific question that they could have asked on the CRT question, which is, as it relates to CRT, is it constitutional? Yes or no? I don't understand why they didn't ask that question. That's the question they needed to ask, but they didn't ask that. Instead, they danced around all kind of other stuff. And now to the confirmation here, I gotta say, listen, there are legitimate questions that you ask anyone who is going to sit potentially on the Supreme Court. I don't think that, well, except for the question, what religion are you? I'm sorry, what? The Constitution's very clear that you cannot ask that question as a qualifier for federal office. What are we doing? So you had that going on. And
the Constitution hasn't mattered to most politicians for the last 30 years, so who cares?
But that is my point. Yet we're saying that, in fact, this is about the Constitution. No, it's about pure politics, which is fine. But so many Americans need to stop talking about the fact that this was all about the fact that she's unqualified. Well, guess what? The Constitution does not lay out any qualifications to be a Supreme Court justice. If you want to attack her credentials and her judicial history, that's what you do. But the unqualified moniker, America just needs to accept. We don't have. No, go ahead.
No, I was going to say we don't have qualifications for a Supreme Court justice, just like we don't have qualifications for a president. We literally have a comedian that's the president of Ukraine after we had the dude from The Apprentice being the president of the United States. Can we please stop using code for I don't want no dark-faced people on the Supreme Court?
When we start come on. No. Lenny, I love you, but I'm not going to let you do that. She is getting treated just like every other Supreme Court nominee. Clarence Thomas, Amy Coney Barrett, they all get rung through the ringer. She ain't getting treated any worse than Brett Kavanaugh.
I'm not saying rung through the ringer. What I'm very specifically saying, Jeff, and we can have this conversation about race right now. Anytime an African American is up for a prestigious role and people want to attack that candidate, whether it's through a confirmation process or a job that they get, what do they usually go after? They're not qualified to have this. I mean, and we could sit here throughout all different types of jobs throughout history. This is code for some people to say, I have a problem with this individual because they don't look like me, they don't think like me, and this is threatening me. And it's just, it's been, and look, and we've seen it in both parties. Look, we've seen the Democrats do this with Barack Obama when he was doing things that he didn't like, including extending the Bush era tax cuts. They did this with Michael Steele when he became the RNC chair, even though he ran for U.S. Congress and was a successful lieutenant governor. And we can go back further and further and further. This is something that some people, not everybody, some people like to say about Black candidates in particular. And so when it rose its head this time around with Judge Brown Jackson, it rang to some individuals that here we go again. Go ahead. I didn't mean to cut you off, but I wanted to clarify not the ringer part, but the qualification part.
I get what you're saying, and I'm not saying that that never happens, because we've all seen that happen. But I don't think that any time a black person's qualifications are questioned, then that's what it was about. I mean, is Harriet Myers, was she just light-skinned? No, she was a white woman, and people question her qualifications. I've heard people question, when it comes to Supreme Court nominees specifically, Lenny, I've heard people question qualifications for all kinds of candidates. Now, maybe you can argue that black candidates get it worse. I'm not sure about that. I mean, Clarence Thomas got it pretty bad. So there was an op-ed written by Juan Williams for The Hill where he named how each person of color, and he included Clarence Thomas, and I was surprised by this, but he included Clarence Thomas, saying that he got the same treatment. I don't necessarily agree with that. I appreciate his consistency, but I don't necessarily agree with that. I think what we're saying with Ketanji Brown Jackson is that people are giving her the same type of questioning that I've seen with others. But here's the difference, though. Here's one thing where I will say it's different. But I'm seeing this in the overall debate over whether a Supreme Court nominee is qualified. Just like Dr. Metzler said, the Constitution doesn't lay out qualifications, but it seems to me that historically it's been, what's their record like? Do they have the requisite experience? Have they been litigators? Have they adjudicated cases? And if they did, then they were qualified. But now I see the debate moving more into, if I don't agree with their politics, then maybe they're not qualified. And I don't think it started here. I think it started just a little bit before, over maybe with Kavanaugh and some of the others. But it's happening here. And that, to me, that's a paradigm shift. Is this what we're really moving into? Are we going to judge somebody's qualifications for Supreme Court based on their politics and not necessarily on their experience?
Well, yeah, and that's exactly the difference between qualifications and credentials. Because essentially what we're saying is it doesn't matter who Biden put up. I mean, we would have gone through the same thing over and over again. That doesn't matter. I think it's the distinction between credentials and qualifications. And, this started, to your point, Jeff, after Robert Bork. This is when this all started. Yeah. So once that started, it is a free fall. But I think what needs to happen is Americans need to say, that's what we're doing, instead of pretending that this is about qualifications. Just say it. That, your qualification is, if you agree with me politically, that's your qualification. Okay, but stop trying to, put it in the wraps of the Constitution. And to the woman question, Jeff, brilliant jokes on the woman question, but to the question of so what is a woman? Of course, here's what she was doing. And again, this goes back to Bork. If she said something about transgender, then they would have gone, here we go. She has this radical, the unfortunate thing for law students in particular is a lot of them are being told, listen, if you want to be a Supreme Court justice or a federal judge, you need to watch what you write when you're law clerking. You need to watch all of law reviews, those kinds of things. But that goes against it. That is such an anti-intellectual piece that it's amazing for people who believe in the Constitution. That, for me, is the biggest problem with these hearings.
Priscilla, you got to go one step further. I mean, literally, you got to watch what you put into your college thesis as an undergrad, as a 21-year-old. You got to kind of watch who you go to the prom with. I mean, it's to that point in time now, and it's ironic because it's not just becoming a Supreme Court justice. They're talking about the NFL draft coming up next week, and they go through people's social media accounts. And if you tweeted something in 9th grade as a 14-year-old, it might cost you, money as a draft pick darn near 8 years later. So it's just where our society is. But let's go back to Judge Brown Jackson for just a second. When we're going through this, and we once again see the intersection of race and politics in history in law, America keeps being reminded, Priscilla, that we're nowhere near as far as we think we are when it comes to race. There are times we can't sift through what's intentional racism, what's unintentional racism, and what is just simply not racism. And if we can't do that in an honest fashion, to Dr. Metzler's point and to Jeff's point, how in the blue blazes can we expect these people on the bench or in elected office to do any better than what we're seeing play out in the media, even in a confirmation hearing over the last several days this week?
You're absolutely right about all of that. I know so many people in my community have race fatigue. I mean, the reason why we're even talking about this right now is because the president of the United States explicitly said he was going to select a Black woman. He should have just selected her based on her qualifications and not brought in race and gender into the situation. Because now, because of where we are societally and the things that we're talking about, that becomes front and center. So the line of questioning, which has been disappointing to me, becomes about the senators themselves. We had Cory Booker, who spent 20 minutes just orating a monologue, not even asking a question, which made me believe he wasn't taking this seriously. He should have asked her questions about how she would interpret the Constitution, because I want to see a justice who's fair. The questions need to get us to that point. Are you a fair justice? Are you objective? Will you look at the facts? I do not care what color you are or what gender you are, because those things should not come into play. Your own biases, your own experiences should not cloud your ability to make a decision based on the Constitution and interpreting that. I know this is human nature, but when you have a society that is really pressing and hyper-focusing on social issues and partisan issues, that's what makes me nervous. That's what makes me nervous about this selection, not because Ketanji doesn't have great experience and great education and can articulate her rationale, but there are going to be clouds. I think we'll get past it. Hopefully, when we see her have some cases under her belt, but it's unfortunate that we have extreme questions that may not necessarily get us to the point where we can dig into the foundation of who she is as a judge. I want to know, is she going to be strict? Is she going to be lenient? Which is some of the argument right now based on some of her past rulings with sexual cases with minors. She has some explaining to do. I'm not sure that she explained it sufficiently, but it's to be determined as we go forward.
Well, just a couple of things. One, I agree with most of what you said, Priscilla, except for the fact that when Reagan said he was going to appoint Sandra Day O'Connor, a woman, to the Supreme Court, and she was the first woman appointed, we didn't have all of this. When Trump said he was going to appoint a woman, he was going to appoint Amy, we didn't have all of this. So that's the thing that I would add. The other thing that I would say here.
Are you saying that basically there's two sides to the coin, that when somebody's intentionally making history on one side, it's great that you're making history on this side, now it's becoming a problem?
Yeah, and here's the other thing too. The problem with a lot of the senators who are asking questions is they've never tried a case. And so as a federal public defender, let's remember when she did those federal public defender cases, as a public defender, you don't get to choose your client.
No, you don't.
So they give you this client and you have to do that. And then when we look at the thing that irritated me the most was the federal sentencing guidelines. The judge can go above or below. That happens every day. Here's the problem, but that's up to Congress to fix, not the courts.
And Dick Durbin actually pointed that out when Lindsey Graham brought it up. Dick Durbin kind of jammed Lindsey Graham up and said, that's kind of on us. We've been kind of pushing this to the back burner, and now you want to blame her for something we pushed to the back burner.
Yeah, you can't, but you can't. Here's the inconsistency. You cannot be a textualist or an originalist and then ask the court to do something about the federal sentencing guidelines. The two are inconsistent.
That's being
It is up to the legislative branch to fix that. So they're getting all the, this all mixed up. It was just terrible. I don't know anymore.
Yeah, I've been meaning to ask you about this, Dr. Metzler. When they set out the guidelines, is this actual law to where a judge cannot give a sentence above those guidelines, or is it still up to the judge's discretion?
The judge has tremendous discretion to go upwards or downwards. You can take an upward departure. So the prosecution says, I want 10 years. The judge has the discretion to say, no, based on XYZ, I'm going to give 20 years.
Okay.
Or the judge can go downwards. So you can deviate up or down. The sentencing commission needs to be revamped 100%. It is a disaster. And so, but again, that's up to Congress. And so getting all of those things mixed up, what I still don't know any more about her judicial philosophy before the hearing than I know after the hearing.
Well,
The only thing
the question, what is your judicial philosophy, and should you even have one, and what does that mean? If you're interpreting the Constitution, then what is the relevancy of a judicial philosophy?
Well, it's very relevant because it's how you're going to interpret the Constitution. But I want to go and take a step back and ask another question, which is, what's the relevancy of these confirmation hearings in 2022 when we have seen for the last several confirmation hearings, it's all political theater. This is not really trying
to answer that.
This is not trying to, I'll get to you in a second, Jeff. I'm going to let you answer first, and Priscilla. We're not trying to get to the judicial philosophy or, I've seen this case or anything else. This is just a bunch of people running for their next office and using, oh crap, they're going to preempt regularly televised programming for me to talk for 20 minutes? Oh, hell. Where's my soapbox? Let me go shine this puppy off and get ready to stand on it, Jeff.
Yeah, so it has no relevance at all in 2022 in the age of Marjorie Taylor Greene, where we don't care about substance anymore. We care about the show. Dr. Metzler, there's a reason why I spent all day joking about this whole thing, because I didn't take it seriously.
Right.
Now, I didn't watch it, but I did keep up with some of the highlights and stuff like that. But I just spent the whole day making fun of it because realistically, she is qualified. She's got the requisite experience.
Yeah.
She's going to get confirmed. And the rest is just theater, just like you said, Lenny. And I don't, sometimes I enjoy it, especially when it was Kavanaugh and we saw Lindsay 2.0. Yeah, I love that theater. That was theater, but it was also serious. But this is just theater. We know she's going to get confirmed. They all know it. They were probably talking to her beforehand. These Republican senators, like, I apologize in advance, but this is what I got to do. I got to play that role. And that's what's happening here. So no, I don't take it seriously. And we will probably never know what her judicial philosophy is, because this is the age we live in now.
Until she's on the bench, and Priscilla, you first, and Dr. Metzler, the crazy thing about this is, how many times throughout American history have we seen a Supreme Court justice get on the bench? We're told that they're one thing until a case comes up and they're completely different.
David Souter.
Yes, there you go. I'll go to the
John Roberts.
I will know that where I'm going to go is one of probably the most famous case over the last 10 years, which is everybody said, Priscilla, that Obamacare wasn't going to happen because conservatives had a 5-4 majority until the freaking Chief Justice flips his vote from what they thought it was going to be. We've seen this throughout American history. You can ask somebody their judicial philosophy until the cows come home. You don't know until that specific case what type of precedent they're going to either create or reverse once they're in that lifetime position.
No, you're 100% right. There were a few questions I thought were legitimate that I think could lead us into understanding Ketanji a little bit better. But for the most part, It was a major disappointment, a circus, very self-serving for senators. They are campaigning. They want everyone, they're posturing, right? They're showing how intelligent they are and how emotional they are. I'm surprised they didn't ask her, what is a Black woman? I mean, explain to me, I'm a Black woman. What does that mean when you say I'm going to appoint a Black woman? We are not a monolith. Nobody, look, I'm not worried. Okay, let me just calm down.
No, don't calm down. Keep
Go ahead.
Let me get hyped up. So I agree that she will likely be confirmed, and she will likely do a great job, and she will get into the mix of what it means to be a Supreme Court justice. She's going to have to really explain herself and write. What do they call, Dr. Metzler? What are they called when your
dissent?
Your dissent.
She's going to be writing in the dissent for a very long time.
I want to make sure I'm using the right terminology, because I'm surprised I didn't get the call. I was waiting for the call because I'm highly qualified.
Yes. Well, see, with the woman thing, the only thing that kept playing in my head was, you remember Harriet Tubman, "Ain't I a woman?" That's the only thing.
Or she couldn't comment on a landmark case. I was really triggered by that. Like, come on, sister girl, you don't remember a landmark?
Oh yeah.
Wait, hold on. Wait a minute. This is the epitome of what I want to say about this before we transition to this. This is nothing more than politics. She knew what she wanted to say. She knows the case. Yes, exactly. It's, she was doing the anti-Atlanta Falcons thing. She's up 28-3. She has the vote. All she has to do is run the football and run out the clock, and she's going to win the Super Bowl. Instead, she continued to throw the ball, and she didn't want to be the New England Patriots. What did she do? She ran the football. I don't remember that. I don't recall. Well, there were certain things that, Ted Cruz asking her about a book for a school that she's on the board for. Anybody that's been on a board knows that a board's not going to necessarily dictate the curriculum. They're not going to do certain things that they were trying to accuse her of doing. Rather than dive into that, she kind of gave the look, kind of played passive, gave really lukewarm answers, and tried to shoo it along. Truth of the matter is she's done. And that's all she needed to do.
Well, speaking of Ted Cruz, did you see the photograph that the CNN photographer took? So right after he had this blow up with Durbin, he goes back to his seat. He has his phone, and he's looking at his Twitter page to see how what he just said
did I go viral.
And that's exactly what it was. And then Lindsay storming out. I'm like, dude, really?
And here's the crazy thing. I'm going to say this, and I'm going to pivot to something, a little bit more serious. But those were two of the 475 people that ran for president in 2016 in the Republican primary. And people wonder why Donald Trump won.
Mm-hmm. And Ted's running again.
Very intelligent people could not make easy tactical decisions when they were on the biggest stage. And it's crazy because you think about Ted Cruz, Jeff, you're Texan for a little while longer. And, he rose on the scene. He beat Rick, good Lord, I forgot his name the same way he forgot the three departments he wanted to close.
Perry?
Rick.
Exactly. It was you all got the double entendre joke. Rick Perry selected person for that U.S. Senate seat. Ted Cruz beat. How do you look that good and then go to where he is now, overplaying your political hand and overplaying the media hand? It's outrageous.
And I love Ted Cruz. I don't care what people say. I love Ted Cruz, but he's doing exactly what I was talking about.
Yeah,
he's mugging for the camera. He's got it. He's part of a podcast. He's always on his social media, and I actually don't really have much of a problem with that per se, because at least in general, when it's time to legislate, he will get involved in legislation. Like, he's not just there to look good. Again, I brought up, this is the age of Marjorie Taylor Greene. There's a big difference. She's there to look good for her base. Ted Cruz is there to look good for his base, but he's also been, involved in key pieces of legislation. So I can't hate on him too much, but I'm afraid that this whole tendency is going to get even worse. It's not even just Marjorie Taylor Greene; it's a lot of others, and it's not just on our side. I mean, we've got the
it's on both sides,
a lot of the same stuff, and we are going towards a more celebrities and politics type of culture, and it's entertaining, but there ain't much to it.
Well, the Democrats didn't even have a pulse. They just kept saying, "Hey, just sit back for the next 20 minutes, and I'm not going to attack you. I'm just going to talk about myself because you've got my vote. So just relax." And I'm like, that's where I totally lost respect for the process because they didn't ask her.
You just lost respect for the process after that?
I would have at least thought that they would ask her questions to really pull out the best of her. They didn't even do that. They needed like 3, 2, 1. They needed some adrenaline, like something. But
well, they're not going to do that because the die's cast. I mean, they've already had the conversations. Girl, you got this. We're just going to sit there and talk about ourselves. We got the votes. So just don't say too much, and we're not going to say too much because at the end of the day, they had the meeting before the meeting, they had the meeting, and then they will have the meeting after the meeting.
And what will they have all 3 times, Dr. Metzler? In all 3 of those instances, they will also have the votes, and that's all. And they have the White House. Speaking of celebrities. Celebrity politics. Let's go to the comedian turned president that's in the middle of a war zone right now. And it's crazy to talk about this because we've had a lot of really traumatic things happen over the last 20 years. And celebrity in politics globally seems like it's peaking more and more the more things we're going through. Hell, we went through Zika 10 years ago.
Yeah, I remember that.
ISIS was only 10 years ago. Ferguson and Ebola, George Floyd and 2016. And, they only took the Crimea from Ukraine in 2015. It may seem like it was 30 years ago, but that was an aggressive action back then. And it seems the more we go through these type of things, Dr. Metzler, the more we see the rise of celebrity politics and look at me, I'm good and I went viral. As we're going through wars and all type of stuff, the latest coming out of Ukraine with the back and forth and Putin trying to manipulate his media and the West is trying to manipulate the anti-Russian media, all while a president that even his most fervent supporters are not really ever been down with in Joe Biden, going into a very critical period of time where we do this wrong. We may not think we're in a world war, but we might be in a world war.
Yeah. And, as much as I appreciate, what the president of Ukraine is doing. Okay, dude, it's getting to be a bit much. You're addressing every country by Zoom. You're addressing them by Zoom and they all give a standing ovation. You've done a lot, but we need you to do more. It's like, okay, at some point, I think folks are going to say, all right, enough of this.
But the fact that Dr. Metzler, it seems like that's the only card that he can play. I mean, again, to Jeff's point, when you have the politics of celebrity, you have a lack of depth in regards to what to do politically and otherwise, other than what you may be seeing. And maybe that well, talking about wells running dry, maybe that well is running dry with Zelensky.
Well, yeah, and here's the other part of it. It seems all nice now, but look at the amount of refugees who are being relocated to these places where, at some point, there's going to be a clash relative to that. And what are they going to do? Go in there and build houses for them? It just becomes one of those things where the well, I think, will be running dry, pretty soon. And all these meetings, my God, there've been 3 meetings. What are they doing? we're going to you can't sanction your way out of this, okay? I mean, you just cannot. And there's kind of a red line, but not really, because if he uses nuclear weapons, well, what does use mean?
It's a pink.
You know, yeah, it's a pink line. Yeah. So that's about where we are relative to that. And the refugee stuff is really going to turn this into a catastrophe. The other thing I would say, the president said, we're going to resettle 100,000 Ukrainian refugees. And the Haitians are like, hey, hi. You deported us. Our president's eyes were gouged out. You deported us, but now you're going. Okay, there you go.
Let's do a little history lesson here. People forget that part of the reason why Hitler lost his ever-loving mind and started World War II was the reparations from World War I that were so stringent on Germany that Germany just said, we're going to build back better, no pun intended. Then we're going to blame the Jews, and then we're going to take over land. And what the hell? While we're doing that, let's just take over the world.
Right.
Dr. Metzler's point, Priscilla, we're going to find out that one or two things are going to happen with these sanctions. Either it is going to completely cripple Russia and they will grind to a halt, or that animal with rabies is going to attack, and it's not going to be pretty when it does.
Well, definitely what's not pretty is the effects of these sanctions on the citizens of Russia who are feeling it. And President Biden just warned China, don't you try to do anything, because Russia has a back door. Their back door is China. And if China decides to jump in and help Russia, then that causes problems with our relationship with China. And are we going to sanction China? And what would happen if we tried to do that? And how would that impact American economics? It would be a disaster for us because costs would go up for us. So as all of these NATO countries are gathering together, trying to decide what their next sanctions are going to be, and they just softly threatened China about, don't you try to do anything to intervene. There are a lot of decisions to be made. And we've been talking about the red line or the pink line or whatever line they want to create. But we are going to have conversations about nuclear weapons or some sort of bio weapon if sanctions don't work and if Putin doesn't stop what he's doing. So these are real conversations that government leaders are going to have.
Jeff Charles, let me ask you this question. What does World War III look like at the beginning? Because to Dr. Metzler's point, you're not going to be able to sanction your way out of this. Putin doesn't seem like he's going to take an L. He's like determined not to take an L. And war doesn't necessarily have to look like what it looked like in your granddaddy's day. War can look like brownouts. War can look like you can't get United flights on the eastern part of the United States off the ground because they had some type of, computer glitch. It might look like Russian planes can't go to half of the world and therefore they're struggling, economically as a result because they can't monetize certain things. And if that's the case, how close are we actually to World War? Because some of that stuff's already happening.
Yeah, I mean, we could be closer than we think. I mean, especially with the situation. And, unfortunately, I mean, because I don't want Putin to win this. I mean, I know Ukraine has its corruption issues, but Putin is clearly the bad guy here. But it's going to get to the point to where the West is going to say, you know what? It's either we can't keep giving aid. So it's either we're going to send troops or we're just going to say, you know what, Ukraine, the well's dry. Good luck. And after that, I mean, I don't know what happens. I mean, they're at a standstill right now, but it's not going to stay that way. Eventually, Putin just might get what he wants, and it might still hurt him. Like we were talking about this last week. I still think that it's possible that even if Putin wins, he still loses. So there's still that possibility that could possibly ward off a kind of international confrontation. If China does jump in and help Russia, that could cause issues with us. I still don't think that there is the will in America to really engage in this type of conflict. We don't want to put American lives on the line. I'm not even confident that we would even be willing to support doing things to Russia's infrastructure or cyberstructure or what have you. Even in that way, I mean, a lot of us just want to keep to ourselves right now. And I think that that's where we're at. I mean, I could be wrong, but even if it doesn't involve American lives, I still could see the American public saying, no, we want nothing to do with this.
Well, I think, and I want to bring it back to you for just a second. I think where America still is right now is, number one, we're still divided. We don't like each other at all, which makes it hard to dislike somebody else. Number two, we have Americans that are saying, but, you know, Putin's not that bad after all. I like strong leaders. And so they're repeating that rhetoric, and they're kind of crossing up who's the bad guy, who's the good guy. Again, it's we've seen this with young people. Redefine what communism is. And then you have to ask them, name one example of communism where the people actually benefited for a quarter of a century. Don't tell me about 25 days after the person took over. Tell me about a generation afterwards, from Cuba to the former Soviet Union. So don't tell me about communism and autocrats and everything else. But the other thing is, we can't get Americans to get past the point of you're going to pay an extra $5 at the pump if you're putting, you know, $5 worth of gallons worth of gas in your car. Hey, you're going to pay, if you got that big old SUV, you're going to pay an extra $20 to $30 when you fill it up. But people are dying, so relatively speaking, it's not that bad. Jeff, we can't even get people past that point in time, let alone, hey, by the way, you might have a rolling brownout because the Russians are going to attack our grid, or the Chinese might attack our grid, or the North Koreans may attack our grid.
Well, and in that case, I would maintain what I said last week. If they attack us, then yes, you will have the will for a war. If they attack our grid, then yes, you will have the will for us to attack their grid. Still not sending soldiers, but grid, yes. But I think that the only way we start upping the ante is if it comes to our soil, and I think that is the only way it happens.
Dr. Metzler, you were talking about pink lines, red lines, mauve lines, whatever color you wanted to choose, because you're the stylish one of the four of us. What is that now? Because it wasn't that line is not what it was last week. And after Joe Biden, the president, has gone over to Europe again, after we've talked about more of what America's going to do again, after we continue to see the war go on in Ukraine again, after we've seen more civilians have loss of life and injury, and we've seen more people flee the country, what is the red line now? And I guess the other question too to that is, what is the red line? And is it really going to be enforced? We talked about this previously on Red and Black. President Obama drew a red line with Syria, and Vladimir Putin watched us not enforce it, which only encouraged him to do everything he's done in the last 10 years as a result of saying the Americans don't have the spine to enforce their own red line. Well,
there is no red line. I mean, it's all this fuzzy talk about we're going to respond if nuclear weapons are used or if biological weapons are used. Okay, I don't know what that even means. I'm not convinced that there.
And well, hold on. Let me ask you this, because that brings up an interesting point too that nobody's talking about. Let's say, and I'm going to ask you first, Dr. Metzler, so hold your thought, but I want you to answer this. Let's say our intelligence comes back and says he's using biological weapons and chemical weapons in Ukraine. After the revered Colin Powell went to the United Nations and said something similar, and it was proven not to be right. And that was when America was a lot more united than we are now. Is that going to tick up the American willingness to go to war and cross that red line if we hear, yeah, he's using biological weapons? Because I can tell you there's going to be probably 30% of the country that's like, it's a lie, especially after going through that with Iraq.
Yeah, I don't think that's going to do it, because that's exactly what people are going to say. Yeah, right. We've been through that before. And how did that work out? I just don't, you know, you're talking about losing a number of American lives. It's just not, I don't think that that's going to happen. And you mentioned the airplanes earlier. That's something that we really, it's less about United, as an example, getting out of the airport, and more about United staying in the air. once it's flying. Because from the standpoint of cyber war, most of these planes are on autopilot. So what's to say they won't take one of the planes out? All of a sudden, the entire system malfunctions. I think we have to be thinking, and of course, people can say, "Oh, you're an alarmist. They can't do that." Yeah, sure.
Yeah, I mean, look, to your point as far as being an alarmist, Priscilla, to Dr. Metzler's point, in 1997, if somebody told you someone's going to hijack a bunch of airplanes and fly them into buildings, what would they have called you? They'd have called you an alarmist.
Yeah.
They'd be like, you're crazy. No one would ever do that. Well, the Twin Towers and the Pentagon have something to say about that.
Mm-hmm.
So, to the point of national defense, which, by the way, Priscilla, we all know this, people forget that the number one job of the federal government is sovereignty of the United States. That's constitutionally obligated. Protect us. Those are the type of scenarios we need to be thinking about. And even with this going on in Ukraine, we're still not there, ma'am, are we?
No, you're absolutely right. That's why so many Americans are upset, because our own country hasn't been safe from a lot of issues. I mean, talk about the border. The border is wide open. The southern border is wide open. But I think going back to Russia, there's still a little time left for Russia to feel the squeeze with all of the sanctions, freezing of assets, not sending them equipment and tools that they need. I know that the G20 is getting ready to meet. If the economy in Russia continues to decline, they might be kicked out of the G20 if they don't figure out these sanction issues. So that remains to be seen. But it's a real thing. It's going to be really interesting to see what sanctions come out of this meeting with NATO, what hard line they imagine there is, and to see the next move of China. Because I think, as we've talked about on these shows in the past, what is China going to do, especially with Taiwan? Mm-hmm. How are they going to respond to the U.S. in connection to the Russian sanctions? Who are their alliances with? So it's there's a gray line here about who's going to do what and who's going to self-serve themselves. But we're dealing with countries with leaders who are very strong and very determined to have complete control. And so I don't know, Dr. Metzler, I know he knows a lot more of what's going on than I do. He seems to have the juicy juice, the secret sauce about what's going on.
You do realize that they will give you a 60-day suspension for using the juicy juice.
Juice, that's right.
That's for a first-time user. So we don't want anybody getting suspended. So just hush on the juicy juice.
Yeah, no, I the G20 thing, I mean, he's already kicked out of the G7. So as it relates to the G20, and this is what irritates me about these international organizations. We're going to meet and discuss it at our meeting. If you're going to kick him out, kick him out. What is there to meet and discuss?
But there's China, right? There's China that's saying, well, you shouldn't kick him out. And so they're trying to mitigate China and try to punish Russia. And you look, the bottom line is this, and Jeff, I'm going to pivot to you on this. You know, China's not exactly been the above board actor in any of this. They've been manipulating currency. They've been stealing intellectual property. They've had land disputes and going in. I mean, we continue to forget about some of the stuff that's been going on in Asia. We still got Taiwan sitting there and the issues with some of their, situations as well. We won't go into the minority populations in China that are having civil rights issues, human rights issues. It's not like China is somebody that we can count on in this. And then, the question then becomes, how close are China and Russia really? And how much can we count on, to Dr. Metzler's point, all these international organizations to actually be what they say they were going to be, other than a bunch of photo ops for people when they go get on airplanes across the world?
No, I mean, I think the international community is just going to basically appease Putin. I think that they're going to stand up to him to a certain extent. They are arming Ukraine. But when it actually comes down to the wire, they're going to give him what he wants. And I use the word appease on purpose, because they want peace in our time.
Yeah, and we've seen that. But Dr. Metzler, what does that look like in the end? Is it just those two, separatist republics in the eastern part of Ukraine? Is that what that looks like now? Does it look like, okay, Ukraine, you can keep your country, but you're going to have to sign something that says that you're not going into NATO? And we talked about that last week, which, that's worth the Kleenex to blow your nose at that point in time, because things change all the time in politics and people rip up treaties all the time. I, again, reference Hitler, reference Stalin, reference this one, and so forth and so on. What, at this point in time, do people think that Putin wants that's going to stymie this back, or at least tamp down issues?
Well, he's going to say, take all the sanctions off. That's going to be number one. He's going to say, don't charge my people as war criminals. That's the other thing that he's going to say. And I think he's going to say, give me those areas and let me get out of here. I mean, that's about it, because that's about all he's going to get. He's not going to get any more. So I think as it comes down to it, that's probably the best deal that he can get. And I think that's going to be negotiated by China. It's not going to be negotiated by the West. That's not going to happen. He's not going to accept it if it comes from the West. The other thing I would say about China, remember, the president of China is an economist. And so he is going to look at economically what's best for China. And he will blend that with politics. But, he is one of the best economists in the world. So let's not forget that.
So that ends up going to this question, Priscilla. I'll ask you last. I'm going to go really quickly before we get out of here. If it goes down the path that Dr. Metzler is suggesting, and China ends up being the chief negotiator with all this, who ends up winning this skirmish, this war, this brief war? Is it Ukraine because they kept their country and they fought off the Russians? Is it the Russians because they showed their military might? Is it NATO because they were able to say, look, I think that Russia and Putin wanted to be more aggressive and they didn't get a chance to be? Is it China because they end up being the chief negotiators and now the swing of power starts shifting over to China? And by the way, while this is happening, Saudi Arabia is considering selling their oil in Chinese currency, not American currency. And people, it's very much underneath the radar, but these are the discussions going on while China may possibly be that chief negotiator to get the Ukrainian-Russian war to finally fizzle out after a month. Who wins? Very briefly, I know we can go into this for another hour in and of itself, but if it plays out the way Dr. Metzler said, with all that going on, who ends up being the big winner? Priscilla?
Oh, me? I thought you were going. I think the person who wins is the person who ends the war and brings peace to that region. Because at the end of the day, if you can save lives, you will be viewed as a hero. And if that's China, as sick as that might sound, because we know what kind of regime that is, they might come out looking like the adult in the room, because the U.S. couldn't do it. Kamala couldn't do it. The NATO couldn't do it. Nobody, no other country. So if it's China and they can stop this war and bring some stability back, they will come out as the winner.
Jeff, what say you?
Yeah, I agree. I mean, if it is China, then they win. I don't know who's going to end up ending that war, but whoever does, they're going to win. All I know is we're going to lose this one because we don't have the leadership. We just don't have the leadership necessary to resolve something like this effectively. We just don't. I mean, the Biden administration has shown repeatedly that it does not know how to handle foreign affairs. I'm not going to say automatically Trump would have done better, but I think he would have been closer to it than this administration. I mean, there's just no way that we're going to be involved in calming the situation down. It's just like Obama, lead from behind. All he's doing is what his old boss did. I mean, that's what this is.
Dr. Metzler, I'll throw this out there with the same question, but with this caveat. People, when Joe Biden first came into the White House, they said he was going to be Jimmy Carter 2.0. And with the inflation and with the advancement of the Russians as far as their aggression, although it seemed rhetorical in January 2021, now we're sitting here in March of 2022, and this is a lot less rhetorical. So again, who ends up being that winner very quickly, because we got to get out of here, and is that rhetoric becoming a reality?
Yeah, well, actually, I think he's Jimmy Carter 10.0. I think 2.0 is just a little too low on the scale. And I think who wins in large part depends on who has the best PR strategy. Who is going to spin this the best? Is China going to spin it the best? Is Zelensky going to say, I sacrificed by saying that I won't join NATO? Look, at the end of the day, he's going to join NATO. It doesn't really even matter. But I think whoever has the best PR machine is who wins, because that is exactly what we're seeing going on right now. If Zelensky did not have that great of a PR team, we wouldn't even be talking about this.
Listen, folks, as you can see, the tone has changed around the world, both here in the United States and across the globe with all these things going on. And we're going to try to both put a smile on our faces while we talk about it, but we're also going to try to bring it to you with a lot of different perspectives with the cross of race and politics and culture and economics that we're seeing play out in all these issues. We again ask you to like, subscribe, share, join the Red and Black channel. We appreciate you being with us. We will catch up to you next week. In the meanwhile, you stay safe, you stay blessed. TCNGB, take care and God bless. Peace.
Good deal.
That was fun, you guys.
Thank ya.
Yeah.